We continue our service now with Seder Kriyat HaTorah, the service for the reading of the Torah. And I ask that you turn with me to page 65, and we're going to chant some of these opening blessings together. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Udavar Adonai Mirushalayim, Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah, Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah, Le'amo Yisrael B'kedushato, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. And let's sing Al Shlosha. Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim ha'olam omed. Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim ha'olam omed. Al HaTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim, Al HaTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. This week, I'm going to be chanting from Beshalach. This is the fourth Torah portion of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And in last week's very, very momentous portion known as Bo, we had the last three of the plagues, and finally Pharaoh allowing the Israelites to leave Egypt, because Pharaoh and the people have had just about enough of the Israelite God and realize that they are powerless. Bishalach means then he sent. And it's named this, obviously, because the way in which every Torah portion is named is for the first word or first few words in that portion. And this Torah portion begins with God sending the Israelites out of Egypt, but using a very specific route, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And there's actually two parts of this Torah portion that I'm going to talk about, but let me chant first. So the blessings can be found, the opening blessing can be found on page 68, and I hope you will join me for that. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach, Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed, Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed, Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato, Baruch ata Adonai noten ha'torah. Amen. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, Shamati. Etuna b'nei Yisrael, daber alehem lemor, ben ha'arba'im tochlu vasar, uvaboker tishbe'u lachem vidatem, ki ani Adonai Elohechem, vayehi ba'erev vatal hasholav, vatachas et hamachane ובבוקר הייתה שכבת הטל סביב למחנה, ותעל שכבה הטל, והנה על פני המדבר דק מחוספס, דק ככפור על הארץ. ויראו בני ישראל, ויאמרו איש אל אחיו מן הוא, כי לא ידעו מהו. ויאמר משה עליהם, הוא הלחם אשר נתן אדוני לכם לאוכלה. Closing blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. So let me bring you a little bit up to speed in terms of what's happening here. The Israelites have left Egypt. God has them go a relatively circuitous route because God is aware that the most direct route is one in which the Israelites will immediately encounter enemies and will be taken up into battle. And the fear, of course, is that they will throw up their hands in dismay and say, why did we leave Israel if we only, or why did we leave Egypt if we only have to fight these enemies now? And so God decides to take them in a little bit more of a circuitous route so that they don't have to encounter these enemies. But it isn't long before they have left Egypt, then the Israelites already start complaining. They complain about lack of food, they complain about lack of drink, and some of those things are going to be taken care of, but to no avail. So, where I'm picking up the narrative, the Israelites have already crossed the Sea of Reeds. We already have the song at the sea, Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai. We already have Miriam with her timbrel in her hand, leading the Israelites, Bnei Israel, across the Sea of Reeds. And we've already had the story about Pharaoh in hot pursuit, and he and all of his soldiers being mired down in the mud at the base of the Sea of Reeds, and then, of course, the water coming back over, enveloping them, and even though the Egyptians had been in hot pursuit, following the Israelites into the sea, they are now drowned in that sea. And, of course, we have the very famous Midrash that we read in the Passover Haggadah every year, that the story that says, the Midrash that says that when Pharaoh and his soldiers were drowning, that the heavenly hosts, the angels, burst out into song and at their demise, and God reprimanded them and said, my creatures are drowning and you sing praises, as if to say, even though the Egyptians were not nice guys and this Pharaoh was the not nicest of all those guys, we do not rejoice in the death of somebody else, even though they are an enemy. Okay. About a month after the Israelites are journeying, they run out of supplies. Their provisions run out. They have no more food. They have no more water. And they are complaining to Moses, saying that, and they use this very nostalgic term, they call it the flesh pots of Egypt. So the flesh pots meaning that meat was plentiful there, and that even though they were slaves, they still had meat to eat and water to drink. And they begin to say, for what will not be the last time, why did you bring us out here to die in the desert? We should have stayed there. And so God responds, and he demonstrates that he's going to bring down food. And what he does is he brings down bread from heaven in the mornings, and this is the manna, or what's known as man in the Hebrew, and then meat provided every night. And the way this works is that every morning the Israelites go out and collect. Every night they go out and collect. And on Fridays, even though we don't have the 10 Commandments yet, that tells us about the observance of Shabbat, we are told that there is a double portion on Fridays so that they have enough to last them through Shabbat and then to Sunday when they collect again. And there are going to be some problems with this system because there are going to be some people who are zealous in collecting more food than they should and not leaving any over for the Sabbath. We'll get to that. So the meat that they get is in the form of quails, and they appear in the evening, and they cover the Israelite camp. Now, you know that a quail is not a huge bird. It's not a turkey. It's not a vulture. It's not a pigeon, but but quails and pigeons are probably the same size, and that's probably what they're talking about, a bird about that size. So the food falls from heaven, the manna and the quail. And Moses tells the Israelites to gather 1 omer, which is a biblical measure of manna per household, for every member every day. So there's an allotment of food for every member every day, and there's enough. And miraculously, no matter how much manna they picked, the amount that they arrived home with was exactly the amount that they should have taken. So you may have had some greedy collectors in there who tried to get more than their share, but lo and behold, by the time they got home, it was exactly what they needed for each member of the household every day. So Moses also commanded the Israelites not to leave any of the manna over from one day to the next. You had to eat your allotment, because there were people who disregarded this admonition, and they found the next morning that their manna was worm infested. So, don't try to hoard your manna. It's not going to work out to your benefit. It's only going to spoil. On Friday, each household was to pick 2 omers, this biblical amount. And you notice we use the same terminology when we count the omer at Passover, counting the sheaves of barley. And on Friday, everybody picked 2 omers, and Moses explained that second portion was to be prepared and set aside for Shabbat. So because no manna was going to come down on Shabbat. And again, some people disregarded Moses's commandment, and they went out and picked manna on Shabbat, which they weren't supposed to do. And God was angry, and he instructed Moses to take a jar of manna and place it in the tabernacle, which has not yet been constructed, as a testament and a reminder to future generations that God will provide enough. It will be plenty. You don't have to hoard more. And if you do, it's going to get worm infested and you're going to be punished. So just take what is due you and nothing more. Okay, so the second part of this Torah portion that I want to talk about and emphasize actually takes place in the 7th Aliyah, the final Aliyah of this particular portion, Bishalach. And it happens during part of the Israelites' journey. They are journeying further and they arrive in Rephidim, and when they get there, their drinking water runs out. So once again, they're going to complain, and God instructs Moses to take his staff and strike a certain rock with his staff. And when Moses does it, water comes pouring out, and of course the people drink. Now this is going to become an important story. In fact, we call it the rock and water story because it's going to happen again later on, and we know that it's going to lead to the eventual downfall of Moses and the reason that he is not going to be permitted to go into the promised land. But just realize that in this Torah portion, Beshalach, we have the first incident of this happening. Okay, so the Israelites complain, Moses gets water for them, and then the Amalekites come and attack them. And Moses directs his protege, Joshua, to assemble an army and battle against Amalek. And Joshua does this, and the Israelites are victorious, aided by certain prayers that Moses does. But God tells Moses to record in the book, which eventually we know is the book of Deuteronomy, that he will surely erase the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Now, there's a very interesting dichotomy here, because Amalek was the king who, when he attacked the Israelites, attacked from behind. And I don't know a lot about warfare, but what I do know is that when there are refugees, which the Israelites were, who are traveling through the desert and they are attacked from behind, those in the rear are going to be the people who are weaker, older, ill, children, and so on. And so if one can say anything about the morality of war, it is probably seen as the most despicable thing for an enemy to attack from the rear, because you are killing the most vulnerable first, instead of facing your enemy head on. So Amalek has come to exemplify the worst of the worst in terms of foreign enemies, because of the way in which he and his soldiers attacked the Israelites. Now, Moses had an ace in the hole, and the ace in the hole, of course, was God. So when Moses ascended a mountain and prayed to God, Amalek and the Amalekites were defeated. But nevertheless, the way in which they went about battling the Israelites was seen as disgraceful. When we get to the Haggadah in April for Pesach, we will read about Amalek again. And he has become kind of like the buzz, that is the buzzword, the buzz name for everything wrong. So throughout Jewish history, we say that there have been many Amaleks who have tried to destroy us. And if we look back through history, we can look at certain Roman emperors. Certainly we look at Haman and compare him to an Amalek because of the way in which he tried to take advantage. We look at certainly Adolf Hitler as an Amalek in the way that he horrifically took advantage of a certain people, namely the Jews, and so on. So we are given this command that says, remember Amalek, but then wipe him out of memory. Well, now how do you remember somebody and say never forget, and then be told that at the same time to erase their memory? It's kind of an interesting dichotomy, as I said, and balancing act. So when we get to Purim and we hear the name Haman, the name Haman, We boo and we hiss and we make all kinds of a racket. We twirl our groggers in order to blot out Haman's name. And yet at the same time, we are told, don't ever forget what these enemies of the Jewish people tried to do to wipe you out. So it's a remember, blot it out. Remember, but blot it out. And so interesting that we are supposed to be able to do these two things, which are really at opposite ends of the spectrum at the same time. So this is how the Torah portion ends, with the Israelites beginning the journey, having crossed the Sea of Reeds, now entering into the desert where they're going to begin their 40 years of meandering. The first instance of Moses being able to find water from a rock, which is going to become significant later on. And finally, the provision, the providing of food, both quail, meat, as well as manna to the Israelites. Now, it's called man, which is a kind of bread, but it's described as if you can imagine some sort of a dew, DEW, that forms on the grass, but it's not water. It has form. I almost envision it looking something like spun candy that you buy, that you get at a cotton candy that you get at a fair, and it's described as also looking like coriander seed, but that it tasted like whatever the person eating it wanted it to taste like. So if you happen to love burgers and fries, to you, it would taste like burgers and fries. The problem is that even eating the thing you love the most for 40 years can get really old. So no matter how much you love burgers and fries, if you eat them for 40 years, you're going to complain about the food. And of course, we are going to see the Israelites throughout this 40-year journey complaining about just about everything. This begins their toddler phase of the journey. So maybe they were like infants in Egypt. They have come out of Egypt now, still experiencing that terrible slave mentality. And now they're going to begin their journey in earnest. And the complaints are going to keep coming. And I'm afraid we're going to talk about a lot of them. So stay tuned. We're going to continue our service now on page 77 as we join together for Aleinu. Page 77. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoye haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, va'anachnu korim, umishtachavim umodim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu, v'ne'emar, v'haya Adonai, lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, Ushemo echad. We continue now on page 80 as we read this beautiful translation from Shalom Rav of Ecclesiastes. It's our top reading on page 80. To everything there is a season, a time for everything under the sun, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to laugh and a time to cry, a time to dance and a time to mourn, a time to seek and a time to let go. This is the time we remember those who gave meaning to our lives. This is the time we remember the bonds that tied us together, the love that we shared, and the memories that remain with us still. I know that there are those out there, those of you who are observing a yahrzeit for a loved one at this time. I'm sorry that I'm not able to share their names, but we all grieve with you and support you as you remember those whom you have loved and lost. In our own community, we remember the following. We remember Celia Felser. We remember Sharon Sweet. We remember Morris Kantrovich. And very recently, on Thursday, the death of our friend Helene Rado, who was a wonderful lady with a great sense of humor. She lived in assisted living for a time and also in Katzen, and we will miss her. And of course, we send our deepest condolences to her family on their loss. So if you would, please join me now on pages 82 and 83 for Kaddish Yatom. Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach hurute v'yamlich malchute, v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'yimru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mavorach le'olam ulamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudasha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata da'amaran ba'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yoshvei Tevel, v'yimru, Amen. May God, who makes peace in high holy places, bring peace upon us and upon all, and together let us say, Amen. So before we sing and do our Kiddush and Motzi, I just want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I hope that you had a good night's rest last night and that you enjoyed the service this morning. We had a little engineering quirk last week, and last Saturday afternoon, my Shabbat Chaverim program was supposed to show. Instead, the Tu B'Shvat Seder got broadcast a little bit early. And so today we're going to show at 1:15 the Shabbat Chaverim, which should have played last Saturday at 1:15. Check your Google calendar and check your printed calendars for all your updates and corrections. But 1:15 this afternoon, I hope you'll come back and join me for what was last week's Shabbat Chaverim. Spoiler alert, it was about last week's Torah portion, Parshat Bo, but there's some great stuff in it, and it never hurts to repeat, right? So I think you're going to enjoy it because I talk about all the interesting midrashim, all the interesting stories about the plagues, how it was handled by the Israelites, how it was handled by the Egyptians, and so on. So no problem going back and watching that this afternoon. Just to give you a little Vorspice, a little taste of what's coming next week. Next Wednesday, which is the 19th, I believe at 10:45 in the morning, but don't hold me to it because these things change. I'm going to be bringing back Chai There with Rabbi Leah, so you'll be able to watch that. Next Friday night, of course, Shabbat blessings. Saturday morning, Shabbat services. And then Saturday night, a Havdalah service. I believe that is what's happening next week. So I implore you all to follow your calendars as well as the Google Calendar, because that's where the most up-to-date information will be. And if things get a little fouled up, I hope you won't blame me. We are all human. We're trying to do the best we can to keep you entertained, spiritually nourished, and informed during this difficult period. And so I hope you won't blame us if something shows at a little bit of a wrong time. But anyway, this afternoon, Shabbat Chaverim from last week. Enjoy it. And then I'll see you next week again for Chai There with Rabbi Leah. So let's sing. Ma yafeh hayom, Shabbat shalom. Ma yafeh hayom, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Ma yafeh hayom. Shabbat shalom. Ma yafeh hayom. Shabbat shalom. Please join me for Kiddush and Motzi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz b'te'avon. Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy your lunch. And I hope to see you back here at 1:15 for Shabbat Chaverim. Shalom for now. Bye-bye.